All right, so today's topic, we're going to talk about attachment styles. And you're probably, if you're looking through the book, I think it's pretty clear as to what attachment styles are, but why are they important to us? We really want to know that because those are really the bedrock of our personality and how we develop our personality over time. And that starts at a very, very young age. Right after birth, we start adapting to whatever attachment styles. Now, we also have temperament, which is a little bit different. I think I talked about that a couple weeks ago because temperament is a child's predisposition to heightened anxiety, for example. But attachment kind of goes hand in hand with temperament, because if you have an anxious child and an anxious parent, that attachment might be a little stressed. So there really is a symbiotic relationship between temperament and attachment styles. And we're not going to go too much in depth in that, but just be aware of that. So one of the things I always ask students, do you ever catch yourself doing something like having like a mini panic attack when you're asked to speak in front of others, or maybe needing to be the center of attention all the time? And then you ask yourself, why do I do that? Part of the answer is that it lies in how you bonded with your parents during childhood. The way that you were raised, where you were raised, and your relationship with your family really shapes a large part of who you will become as an adult. If you know what your childhood, how your childhood affects you in some weird and unexpected ways. One of the ways that your childhood molds you into the person that you are is through the development of attachment styles, like I said earlier. And what we'll talk about today are the 4 attachment styles, and how you can spot them at work or school, or even relationships and crises. Now, where this plays a really big role for many of you that are going to be working in the field, either as social workers or teachers or whatever, or even maybe even behavioral therapists in some way, is identifying what these attachment styles are. Because if you can identify maybe a maladaptive attachment style, you can work with the parents to kind of squelch whatever anxiety that comes from that. Or if there's any kind of trauma, I work a lot with children in foster care that have type 4 personality, which is stressed and disorganized. And I'll talk about that more a little bit later and describe that. But they've experienced some kind of trauma in their life that guides them to mistrust, to be fearful, to be almost, give people the wrong indications, the wrong gestures that they're safe, which could affect further parenting, especially if they're in foster care or something. So anyway, just really interesting stuff with this, and I think it's very important. So you might be asking yourself, what is attachment style and why should I care? Let me actually, before I get into that, start sharing my screen with you. This works. All right. Hopefully, are you able to see my screen there? All right. So within your video, within your resources, I included a video of Harlow's monkey attachment, and what that video showed. I'm not going to play it here today because you have it within your resources. But what that showed was that the chimpanzees, which are chimpanzees, which are very close to humans as far as behaviors and patterns, how they procreate, how they socialize, it's very similar to how humans do. So what Harlow did was experimentations on how monkeys reacted to warmth, reacted to nurturing, or are they more likely to be fed? And what he found, what his team found, is that monkeys that are nurtured tend to be more secure, tend to be more well-rounded and adaptable to their environment, where other monkeys that might be more fearful have higher anxiety about uncertainty, right? Especially in new environments, and they don't adapt nearly as well. In fact, in some cases, it could be very harmful for them. So thanks to the research of Harry Harlow and John Balby in the mental health community, we use the phrase attachment style to describe ways they interact, or ways we interact with each other throughout our lives, as you may have guessed. And this shows up in relationships, right? So we start developing our attachment style as an infant, like I mentioned. So 4 attachment styles. It's really formed by the way we bond with our parents or caregivers, and it continues to be shaped throughout your entire childhood. Understanding your attachment style is a big deal because it can tell a lot about how you relate to your friends and your family, and how you work with groups of people, right? We're doing group projects here. So how do our attachment styles really affect how we work with others and how you handle problems and obstacles in your life, right? Of course, there are other things such as temperament, like we talked about. There's culture, there's self-talk, and all these things that influence the way you deal with people. But for now, we're just really going to focus on these 4 attachment styles. So in 1970, a woman by the name of Mary Ainsworth did some research because she wanted to understand how children form these attachment styles. She wanted to know more about how children with different temperaments attach to their parents, and what this says about how they relate to the rest of the world. So what they get is really separation anxiety when they're away from their mother, and that's kind of normal, right? Or would they settle into their environment a little bit more fine, right? We do see a little bit of separation anxiety. Like I said, it's normal, but when it starts affecting functioning to where the child cannot be separated, especially in a school environment, that can have some very negative consequences. So her research has really shown us people and how they form attachments in one of 4 ways. Now, I'm just going to briefly talk about each one of these before, and then I'm going to go into depth for each one of these. Okay, so our type 1 is secure type. Okay, this is our first attachment style. And you might, I think your book also refers to it as type B. Okay, and people with this attachment style tend to be tend to feel like they're confident that their needs are going to be met, and they're most likely going to assert themselves, and they're going to ask for help, right? Because that's they're more confident with their environment. That if we go back to what we talked about with Eric Erickson, the trust versus mistrust, right? More leaning towards the trust on this side of things, right? Type 2 is going to be insecure, or type A. Okay. Now, you're probably, any of you that have studied personality types, you probably heard of type A and type B personality. These are very similar. There are some a little bit of differences between it, because that's not to say somebody with type A personality is necessarily insecure. Okay, and I don't think we really cover personality types so much in this class. I might be able to get into it a little bit, but just understand that this does not necessarily correlate. Like some of you may have taken personality tests and discovered that you're a type, you may be more of a type A personality. That just means that's how you get your energy. You get your energy from external sources, as opposed to somebody that's type B, that's a little bit more internal. Okay, so big difference there. But for the purposes of attachment styles, we're going to look at type A as being more the insecure, or avoidant. Okay, avoidant attachment style. So people with this attachment style can be difficult to read because they really alternate between being super clingy and rejecting others, and they're often insecure and seem to have trouble exploring new situations, like we saw with the Harlow-Balby monkey experiment, right, in your video. So the other type that Mary Ainsworth had described was the insecure, or insecure ambivalent. Now, a little bit different than insecure avoidant. And we're going to actually call this type C. Okay. So people with this attachment style can be difficult because I'm sorry. I apologize. Let me backtrack a little bit. So this is where they're really the clingy and they have trouble exploring new situations. Insecure avoidant type, tend to be more withdrawn and independent, and they usually don't believe others, and they don't think that their needs are going to be met. So, and again, I'm going to really delve a little bit deeper into each one of these as we go through them. Then type 4 is disorganized. Now, this is the one I talked about earlier that you might see with children that have endured some kind of trauma, or maybe they've had some kind of rupture, fissure in their relationship, like their parents were neglectful in some way or even abusive. This is usually where we tend to see disorganized. There also might be some other chemical explanation. So if a child is predisposed to some kind of serious mental health issues like ADHD or maybe even childhood schizophrenia, if they're showing early symptoms of that, that might explain why they're disorganized as well. So my point is, just because they're disorganized does not necessarily mean that they've had some kind of trauma in their life. But we do see children that endure certain types of trauma tend to go into this classification of disorganized personality or attachment style. Okay, so people with this attachment style view all interactions with others as if they're a chance to solve old traumatic situations from their past. They may reenact it, right? They tend to suffer from depression and anxiety and PTSD, and those are the disorganized attachment style. They're more likely than the other three to use negative things like drugs and alcohol to start to try and disconnect from those painful feelings. Okay, so if everyone has an attachment style, you can probably name at least one person in your life with each one of those styles, right? So think about that. I know we're not really doing a whole lot with the assignment this week, but maybe if we have a little bit of time later, I would like to have you go through and see if you can identify like maybe somebody in your life. You don't necessarily have to give me a name or anything, but just think of examples of who falls under these classifications and describe what you see with them and why you believe that. Okay, so we'll delve into that a little bit later. All right, so let's look at our attachment style. So our first one that we described was secure attachment, or type A, right? I'm sorry, type B. My mistake, type B. All right, so people with the secure attachment style are typically focused on, and they're really good communicators, okay? So they're focused and good communication. So usually their communication skills are a little bit more advanced. They're proficient within social groups. They're least likely to get involved in gossip or drama, right? Because they are really focused on what their needs are and how they can help others, right? So they can expand on that. So very sociable people for the most part, but they most likely are to ask, they're the ones that are going to ask questions in the meeting, or they're going to sit in the front of the class, right? They're going to be outgoing. So that'll be another. Okay. And these are just some characteristics. Like I said, they don't necessarily mean that everybody within this secure type, they're going to show all of these. But relationships, people with secure attachment style are most likely to make the first move and least likely to play head games with other people. Okay. They tend to have healthy boundaries. Okay. So boundaries are good. And think about that when you're considering your examples. You know, do they have healthy boundaries? They're usually respectful of others' boundaries in crisis. Although these secure attachment styles, they don't really enjoy drama or crisis, but they are able to manage their emotions. So emotional regulation. Seems to be a little bit better with them, okay? They're able to see big pictures when problems happen, and they keep their cool enough to tolerate differences and opinions and help smooth and hurt or help smooth over hurt feelings, okay? So we really tend to see early maturity. Now, I will point your attention to when we get into more of the insecure types, or even the disorganized type, we may see glimpses of early maturity, and that could be what we call in the field, we call that parentification. That would be a child's way of compensating for whatever neglect they had, to kind of parentify. They want to be a parent and mother somebody else from experiencing that trauma. So that a little bit different, and you kind of have to look at other symptoms if you have a child that's parentifying in some way. Okay, but for the most part, we do see early maturity. We see emotional regulation. We don't see very many outbursts with people that have secure type. Okay, so that's secure type. Let's look at our second one, which is the insecure avoidant, and this is our type A. Okay, so at work and in school, the person with an insecure avoidant attachment style probably has difficulty making friends. Okay, and that could be for various reasons. Oops, friends. It probably, they might be seen as a loner sometimes, right? At school or at work, and they tend to be more focused on the work itself rather than the social part of the group projects, right? So low social, oftentimes, or the other side of that, we could see somebody with high social, but they're using social for a different reason. They're using that for some kind of codependency. Okay, so that could be either way, but again, you'd have to look at all the other factors, all the other characteristics within their behaviors and their thought patterns to really better assess this. Okay. Their friends or significant other with an insecure avoidant attachment style may have problems talking or even identifying how they feel. So poor, I'm not going to say, I guess, yeah, I'm going to say poor communication skills. Communication and difficulty expressing emotions verbally. Okay. What we usually see with difficulty expressing emotions verbally, we might see them acting out a little bit more. We might see more tantrums or outbursts of anger or even crying, right? So people with avoidant types really aren't able to vocalize their thoughts and emotions effectively. Okay. They tend to be happier talking more about intellectual topics. Okay, so that might be more of a a logical, like a logical thinker or something. Okay, as opposed to emotional, right? You might see more people with insecure avoidant attachment style. They might be more likely to be that friend who tells you that nothing's wrong and then explodes in anger, right? Again, that emotional regulation. A crisis or a person in a crisis with an insecure avoidant attachment style goes out of their way to avoid super emotional situations, which makes them really great in crises. So you might see a lot of people tend to gravitate towards more like medical fields, right, or something like that, because they handle crises very well. They think very logically, and they're able to be more objective in nature to take charge and do what's needed in order to solve problems, right? So actions first, feel it later kind of thing. So very objective. We usually see people in this as being objective. Okay. the two of these, I'm not really saying one is better than the other. You know, some people may not need to be overly emotive, right? Maybe they, you know, ideally we think that that's a good thing, but some people thrive very well in an environment that that they just think. I worked at several agencies when I was in the Air Force, and you know, we had a lot of people that I worked with, a lot of personality types that we had really smart people that we called wall huggers, and that's a true term for one of the agencies that I worked at. They were absolutely avoidant of other people. They were probably the smartest people you would have ever met in your life. But the reason they call them wall huggers is because, and this is a true story, they walked down the halls of the buildings, of the offices, with their shoulder to the wall and feet, or and their eyes on their feet, and they didn't make eye contact with anybody because that was uncomfortable with them. This would be more of an insecure avoidance type A personality, but it works for them, right? They're making lots of money. They're in their home, their world, and however it is working for them, and they're great for it. But for somebody that wants to be more emotional, that is probably not the lifestyle or personality that's going to work for them. So anyway, you kind of have to look at that. Is it working for them? If so, then, you know, is there really anything that needs, anything that's dysfunctional that we need to change? Okay. So, any questions or comments on the first two? Anything you need clarified between the two of them before we get on to the third type? All right. So, is our insecure ambivalent? Or our type C personality, okay? So at work or school, these are the classmates and coworkers who have always been preoccupied or anxious. So we're going to see high anxiety with these individuals, okay? Across the board. It could be, you know, it could be socially, it could be with their schoolwork, right? So people with type C attachment styles tend to be more sensitive about their work and need more reassurance than other attachment styles. So more validation is needed. More, or reassurance, I'll just put that as well, right? Because they need to be reassured. Again, and this would, if we're looking at Erik Erikson's, this is going to be more the mistrust side of the scale, right? So in relationships, those with type C attachment styles are often labeled as too sensitive because they react really strongly to just about anything. So highly reactive. And we could see that show up again, usually in anger, or maybe even crying. You know, people that are sensitive might cry a little bit more with insecure ambivalent styles. Okay, it seems like they're really they have, I'm trying to think of the word I'm using, rejection. Okay, they feel rejection is imminent with just about everybody, so they might be a little bit more sensitive to being rejected. Okay, this may cause a person with this type to see attachment. They may be clingy, like I said earlier. So somebody that might be a little bit more clingy, right? Because their self-esteem, I know we haven't gone into self-esteem and self-efficacy yet, but now their self-esteem is probably very, very low. They value their relationships because that defines them, right? So they might tend to be a little bit more clingy or attempt to reject somebody before they get rejected. That could happen. They also tend to blame others for relationship issues, okay? A lot of blaming or deflecting, which is if any of you have taken my Psych 100 course or Psych 101 course, you would know that is one of Freud's defense mechanisms, right? Deflection. In a crisis, people with type C attachment style seem to feed on drama, and they'll often stir the pot during crisis because of their anxiety and their habit of personalizing each other's behaviors. So those with the insecure, ambivalent resistant attachment style need a lot of reassurance, and really they need a lot of advice when they're having issues. Okay, so again, we're going to look at clingy. I'm going to expand on that and say they might seem a little bit more needy. These are the ones that are unsure of themselves, so the reassurance is often helpful for them. Okay. All right. Any questions on insecure ambivalence? Does that make sense? I mean, are y'all understanding the difference between insecure ambivalent and insecure avoidant? Avoidant, they may have their own anxieties, but they kind of keep to themselves. Ambivalent, they might be a little bit more clingy. Okay. All right. So let's cover our fourth and final one here. And I'm going to give you a fun little project here. So our fourth one is disorganized. Okay. Now, out of the four of them, I'm like I said, I'm going to say there might be a place for each one of those other personality types, right? Or those each other attachment styles. However, 4 is highly dysfunctional. It's one that usually gets a person into trouble. They have a hard time sustaining relationships. So I will say that this is probably, the other ones, we can probably see some positives in there and how they can function in society. However, disorganized usually is not the case. Okay. So at work or school, whether they do it by calling attention to themselves, like pulling a fire alarm or getting a coworker fired or proudly breaking the rules, people with disorganized attachment styles love to test boundaries. Okay. And that could be for one of many reasons. Again, if they're in that mistrust realm, they might feel like they're being rejected or they're going to be rejected. So again, they're going to beat somebody to the punch. So they're going to test boundaries and see what they can get away with, right? Classmates and coworkers might see the person with a disorganized attachment style as charismatic, right? Dangerously charismatic, because usually it comes with an agenda. Okay, so that's kind of a negative trait to a person with disorganized, but they're most likely to engage in mean type behaviors, and so they might be, there might be a little bit of like cruelty or something. Cruelty. I don't know if there's an I in there. I misspell check sometimes, but people for relationships, it can be really downright challenging to have somebody close with someone who has disorganized attachment style, because they can be aggressive. And somebody that likes to test boundaries may also cross the line into abusive. Okay. And as you can see, it doesn't fit into society very well, right? They might even be manipulative. Again, goes along with that charismatic. Somebody that's charismatic doesn't necessarily mean they're disorganized, but however, if charisma is paired up with manipulation, then that could be a very dangerous combination for that person, right? They manipulate loved ones, family members, or people that witness somebody with disorganized attachment style often feel like they're replacing those that hurt this person in the past, right? So a lot of past reconciliation. Yay. Okay. I'm just happy to be able to spell this stuff without Apple doing its autocorrect on it. So they're really looking to reconcile people that hurt them in the past. And their current drama in crisis is often, it feels as though they're reliving the past, right? So it kind of goes back to almost that PTSD we talked about a little earlier. They focus on the negativity. Okay, so a lot of negative thoughts and emotions usually. I'm just gonna put negativity. Okay. And these feelings are really triggered, and they can lead to explosive anger and even substance abuse. Okay. Okay. So those are the 4 attachment styles that Mary Ainsworth really proposed. And maybe you can see yourself or anyone else you know in some of these examples. But more importantly, how do you feel really about what you heard about recognizing something like this with these people? The good thing is these attachment styles really aren't set in stone, okay? It's not that we're all of one of these, really. We could be a variation of many of these, right? We may be disorganized in relationships because that's where somebody had been hurt before, right? So maybe they're great. Maybe they're a type B in their work life, but maybe they're a type 4 disorganized in relationships or something. So there could be a mix of both of these, and it just really depends on the person and their experience. Okay, so what I would like to do is break you off into groups. And I think I'm just going to keep your regular groups. So whatever group you're in, go ahead and get into that. What I'd like you to do is come up with like 4 examples, and you don't necessarily have to give me names, but maybe somebody, it could be maybe even a character on TV or a movie character, somebody that you would describe as one of these 4 types, okay? And I'll let me go back to slide 1 here so you can kind of see that if you want to write those down. And just give me an example of somebody that you know presents these and that you'd be willing to share with the class, okay? Any questions? Did the instructions make sense? All right. So I'm going to open up the breakout rooms. And if you just want to get into whatever room your group is, that'll make it a little bit easier. And I know I'm going to have to, if you don't get one, I'll just call you out. So go ahead. For those of you that get the invite, go to your room. If you don't get the invite, let me know what group you're in, and I'll send you I'll assign you to that room. Okay. And we'll give this maybe about 10 minutes. So we'll meet back here about 11:50. Okay. Any questions before we begin? All right, you should have your room assignments.